so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. The mountains are His, the rivers are His, the stars are His handiwork too. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do.
Hi, and welcome to Online Children's Ministry. Today I'm in our church nursery, and I'm going to use some of the toys from this nursery in order to tell the story of Joshua and the Big Wall. Some of you may have heard this story before, and you've heard it called Joshua and the Big Wall, or you've heard it called Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. Others of you may have heard the song before. Sing it with me if you know it. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Well, it seems that this story is about Joshua, but this story is also about God. And so I encourage you today, as you listen and watch the story, to hear what God does in this story for His people. I wonder what we can learn about God through listening to this story. I'll be reading the story from the Jesus Storybook Bible. So remember to listen to something that we can learn about God through this story and what God is doing for His people. After Moses died, God gave His people a new leader. His name was Joshua. This is Joshua and his donkey. The name Joshua means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around the desert for 40 years. So you can imagine that they were pretty sick of the sand, and anything yellow and tense was not enjoyable to them. They were so happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and to see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. But there was one problem: Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the land. The people looked at Jericho, at the big, giant, scary wall around it, at the tall, towering ramparts, at the heavy iron gates bolted shut. They looked at each other. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew, and God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised, because it was a very odd battle plan indeed, as we'll soon find out. Then God made His people a promise. I will always be with you, and I will never ever leave you. So Joshua gathered his army together. Imagine a big army right here. They had their swords and spears and shields, and they were ready to fight. But the plan wasn't about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching and marching around the city. Round and around they go, day after day. They're too scared to fight, said the people in Jericho. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. On the seventh day, God told His people to march around the city 7 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then God told them to make as much noise as they could. And as it turned out, that loud, ear-splitting noise started to split the stones, and the huge, strong walls of Jericho began to tumble down as if they were made of sand. And Jericho vanished into a cloud of dust. And so it was that God's people entered into their new home. They didn't have to fight to get in. They just had to walk. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. God has brought down the wall of Jericho. God is so powerful, and God keeps his promises. After this, God's people lived in the land for a while. And there came a time where God's people would scatter into many different lands. But one day, God was going to give his people another leader. And one day they would give them another home that no one could ever take away from him. And that alludes to Jesus, who we talk about later on in the New Testament. So what did we learn about God through that story? I would say that we learned that God is pretty powerful because God brought down the wall of Jericho in order for his people to enter into the promised land. God also keeps his promises. He had promised to the Israelites for 40 long years that he would bring them into the promised land, and he did. And so this story of Joshua isn't just a story about Joshua. It's also about God and about how powerful he is and about how he keeps his promises. I hope you have a really great week. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time.